Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. There's a lot of great work being done by organizations across North America when it comes to resilience. In this episode, I speak with Laurie Schoeman. Laurie's with Enterprise Community Partners. She's headquartered out of New York, but they're doing work across the U.S. in various communities, including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. They're working with communities in order to better prepare when it comes to planning urban development, ensuring that housing stock, especially affordable housing stock, is resilient. So stay tuned as I talk to Laurie about some of the cool programs they're doing and some of the free resources that are available to you. So stay tuned. Hi, Laurie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Leanne. Thank you for asking.
So before we get started, can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I'm an urban planner that lives in New York City. I am the National Director for Enterprise Community Partners, Resiliency and Disaster Recovery work around the nation, around the US. And I work in many different communities on a topic that I care very deeply about. Actually, two topics. One is weather, and the other topic is helping our most vulnerable communities deal with the risks we're facing from a changing climate.
So tell me a little bit about Enterprise Community Partners as an organization. What does it do?
Enterprise Community Partners is a very unique organization. We're a nonprofit that's located based in the US. We were founded 40 years ago by another urban planner, James Reffs, who believed that urban planning had the potential to shape the destiny of so many communities around the nation. He was a developer, and he actually started his work trying to figure out how to provide affordable housing to communities in need in Baltimore. Over 40 years ago, he started this organization, and since then we've grown to encompass 11 markets around the nation. We have a robust set of initiatives working with communities all over the country, trying to preserve affordable housing, fund affordable housing, protect affordable housing. And my initiative is interesting because we work to ensure that communities have sufficient and preserved affordable housing, that their housing is safe from the risks that we're facing from climate. We're a nonprofit, so we work with many different stakeholders, and we're also considered an intermediary. And what this is essentially we liaise between public sector, communities, increasingly private sector, to understand how to translate the various issues of the day that affects all of these stakeholders. So I do a lot of work with HUD and FEMA. We work on the ground with community organizations, tribes, rural communities, jurisdictions. So I love my job because we're able to do a lot of great stuff with a lot of really good, well-intentioned people that play a lot of different roles in helping to protect our country.
I think that's great. I know some of the work that I do with communities. I'm thrilled that you, as a planner, as someone who understands urban development, is involved in this issue, because I think so often, say elected officials get a lot of pressure to approve developments in certain areas. And yet we're actually putting people in harm's way. And you understand that component that, the most vulnerable tend to be in those areas, those low-lying at-risk areas. So helping work with communities, with developers, is that the kind of work you get involved in?
Yeah, and Leanne, it's not a coincidence that these communities are in harm's way. And I come from this as a planner. When I went into planning school in New York City in 2000, I never thought that this would be the field I would land in. I learned as an early planner working in New York City in communities like the Bronx, South Bronx, working in communities that had faced decades of redlining and decades of poor policies from the federal government down, that were aimed to help support these communities and help build the communities' ideas of planning that were antiquated. A lot of these ideas, like the Federal Highway Administration, actually did more harm than good and put communities at great risk from things like extreme heat. So as an early planner, I learned about issues of redlining, issues of the Federal Highway Administration, issues around slum clearance, and I always questioned the outcome. What happened to the communities once their local sort of businesses were closed and the highways came through and disrupted these communities? What ended up happening to these communities? And you look at the decades of aftermath that have occurred in these communities, and you see a direct correlation between weather, climate risk, and what conditions these communities are in. So let's take, for example, the South Bronx, a community I've worked deeply in for 20 years. You know, having highways run through the South Bronx in the way that they're running through the South Bronx and put into place has created enormous vulnerability around flooding, as well as extreme heat, as well as noise, as well as disruption to the quality of life and transportation access for communities. So it is no coincidence that many vulnerable communities are in harm's way because, you know, of course, a lot of the land used for public housing, land at the Rockaways, for example, was floodplain land, cheaper land that, you know, jurisdiction said, we'll build on that, it's cheaper to build on. But it was short-sighted because now we're dealing with a lot of communities are at extreme risk to flooding, fires, earthquakes, and on and on.
And that's the thing. I mean, a lot of people, you know, they blame everything on climate. It's like, okay, that's an element you must factor in. You also need to look at poor planning decisions that were made and approvals that should have never happened. I know there's communities where, you know, several times something has come to their council. It's been denied. Finally, it was approved. And you think just because it keeps coming back doesn't mean you need to approve it. Because you're in the aftermath.
You know, the transit-oriented development, the planning sort of framework that TOD has put forward is interesting because it basically calls to densify communities, to create more connection for communities to transportation, to jobs, to park space. And that's a very enticing idea. And for me as a planner, that's something that kind of got me started thinking about resiliency, how to plan smarter, plan more equitably, and provide everyone with an opportunity to advance and an opportunity to grow and thrive. But, you know, as long as we have communities dealing with these unmitigated highway systems and floodplains that, you know, housing isn't protected from, we're going to have problems. And we need to resolve these immediately. And I believe in the next administration, we have an opportunity to do something really, really wonderful.
Well, that's great. So as far as from your perspective, what are some of the solutions that you see that are working?
Enterprise, we work on a lot of different solutions in the particular space of resiliency and disaster recovery. We ushered in what I'm calling a new sort of initiative, an era of safe housing protection, and this is under the guise of a Keep Safe America initiative, where we're working directly with communities like Miami, like communities in Puerto Rico and the VI, in New York, in California, to help identify a ground-up mitigation plan that works to protect housing, specifically affordable housing in these communities. And there's no one-size-fits-all, Leanne. I mean, we know that the three areas we need to work on to understand how to mitigate communities from climate risks, as well as adapt communities to climate risks, are looking at our buildings. So we need to look at our infrastructure, our buildings and our infrastructure. What is the connection between grids and housing? What is the connection between infrastructure and housing, and how can we mitigate both? It's not just a matter of lifting a building above the base flood elevation. That's just one of many solutions. Some of the solutions that come forward for building and infrastructure include maximizing the efficiency of a building, ensuring that there's sufficient backup for the building, ensuring that we think about the full envelope of the building and the site of the building. So we have a initiative in Puerto Rico, Keep Safe Puerto Rico, where we created a book called Keep Safe Puerto Rico, or Keep Safe, a guide for island communities and housing. And we look at the full sequence of how you design, construct, and operate a house so that it can be most resilient. We'd like to turn to infrastructure as well. How do you design, shape, and operate infrastructure so that it's able to adapt to changing climate risks and mitigate these risks? The second area we need to look at is our operational and business continuity solutions. So how do we keep services and businesses alive and in continuity after an event? And then, of course, how do we work with supporting households, communities, and people to be able to withstand the risks from a changing climate? Now, all of this work has to come into place well before the event occurs. Once the event occurs, you're dealing with trauma, triage, and a lot of expense that incurs as a result of an event, like a hurricane, a tornado, a fire. So a majority of this work needs to take place before the event happens, and that needs to take place with partnership from the city, from your jurisdiction, from community groups, as well as the private sector. So we need to rethink how we mitigate our communities through mitigation planning, through participatory action, to make sure we've invested in communities before the event happens.
Yeah, no, that's really smart. And I know your guide, that Keep Safe Guide to Island Communities, that's available for download off your website, right?
That's available off our website. What's also available on our website is a guide for multifamily housing. So multifamily housing can be resilient before an event. We look very closely at floodplain communities. What's also available to folks is a guide on developing your business continuity. So we have a full guide that was developed by us and Fannie Mae to help folks build a business continuity plan, to help them through understanding what it means to have the right insurance in place, what it means to have the right communication system in place. We should be drilling our emergency plans and working with residents. So we have a lot of free tools on our website. Another free tool is a tool that helps you understand the risk of your house from a range of climate events. And we provide you with a risk rating, and that's on our Portfolio Protect tool. So our commitment to our communities that we serve is to develop the best-in-class resources to provide for free to communities to help plan their housing, their communities, their services better. And it is, an effort that we're going to continue to work on. We're going to hope to continue to adopt more communities to step forward to say, I'd like to be a Keep Safe community. We'd like to invite communities like Charleston, like Detroit, like a variety of Galveston, other communities to step forward, Orlando, to say, yes, we'd like to be a Keep Safe community, and we're committed to working with enterprise and working with our partners to develop solutions that will work for us, because not every solution works for everyone. So these are basic, baseline, customized, ground-up solutions for communities. And what we provide is the support and the know-how and the sort of shared lessons learned from the work we've been doing in this space. But yeah, that's the question for folks around the country. Step forward.
That's fantastic. And I think your work is going to become even more important in the future as more communities are getting the awareness around these kinds of things, that we have to start mitigating, we have to start planning better. And what do we do? Do we keep building back exactly the same that insurance allows you to, or do we look at building back differently, more resilient? And I think that's, I was not aware of all the resources you guys have, and I'm going to for sure let people know about them. So, because I think it's really important, the work you do.
You said something interesting. Build back better is the motto of the incoming Biden-Harris administration. Build back better. And that's what we're aiming to do, and to help support folks to build back better for themselves. The top-down approach is an approach that does not really work to infuse the support and the know-how in communities for communities to really direct their own future. So we're really asking for these partnerships so that we understand what the needs are at the community level. We advise many different agencies on this work. We really want to make sure that issues around environmental justice, issues of participatory planning, Issues that face frontline communities and communities of color are really prioritized in the resiliency work because, of course, who better knows how to mitigate risk to the South Bronx than community groups on the ground in the South Bronx? So I look forward to an era where more voice comes in, voices of youth, voices of Latinx communities, voices of planners, citizen scientists, that together we create a more resilient vision for the nation and for the world based on lived experience, not just from textbooks or academic, but lived experience. That to me is so exciting.
Yeah. Well, Laurie, before we wrap up, is there anything else that perhaps you wanted to mention that I didn't ask about?
I am just so glad that we had a chance to chat. I would say that the top 3 things we should be looking forward to in the next year are ways of funding this work and identifying some funding to help communities build, ways of identifying technical support to communities as they build, and then just sharing stories among the different organizations and jurisdictions working day in and day out to build resilient communities, and creating a network of storytelling and a network of partnerships so we can learn from each other and not have to repeat the wheel every time we start thinking about fire safety or earthquake safety or flooding safety. So I think we can learn a lot from each other, and I'm looking forward to an exciting year ahead.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Leanne.